What? Oh, that's seriously. For great.
Walked out of rehab with and 12-step programs was the belief that I was sick forever. I had a disease and I was always going to be sick for the rest of my life, and I just had to accept that. I want to talk about that for a minute because it's not true. It's not true, but it depends on where you are. There is a very benevolent perspective to calling it a disease. And I think it helps to identify what disease actually means. Because on some level, everything is a dis-ease. Depression is dis-ease. Anger is dis-ease. Okay, cancer is a dis-ease. It's all comes down to understanding how a human being acts. And I'm not going to cover that too much in this video. It would take forever, but essentially we're electrical vibrational beings. And when we're in wholeness and alignment, basically all the symptoms can disappear on some level. So calling it a disease fosters compassion, right? It gets rid of the perspective of, why can't you just stop drinking, you stupid, worthless piece of shit addict? Just quit. Well, you can't just quit when you've been doing it for so many years. It becomes a really, really bad habit. And so by labeling it a disease, the establishment, the institutions of society look at people like, oh, they're sick, they can't help it. And that's a very good thing. It helps people to heal. The problem, though, is if you carry that for too long, as you heal, you get to a level where it begins to hold you back, because healing comes in levels and layers. The first step to healing a problem is being like, I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic, I'm sick, help me. For a while, that's progress. But as you heal more and more and more, that can hold you back, because ultimately we all are what we believe ourselves to be. It's like using the word of God to continue to tell yourself that you're fucked up and there's something wrong with you. So if after 2 years sober, 3 years sober, you're walking around going, I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic, I'm sick, I'm broken forever.
Yeah, that's it.
That's where you're going to stay.
That's it. Don't
now,
count
how
the
you
days
get out of that, I'm not
down.
going to cover that in this video. I'll cover that in other videos. But that's just the essence of what I want people to understand.
This is
One
a
of the
great
things
video.
that I walked out of 7:15. Breakfast started at 7:30. We had chores, we had groups, we had meetings. If you were a minute late, you got written down. If you left the pen out in the room and left the room and came back, you got a strike for that. You own the fact that you left the pen out, you would get written 5,000 words. You couldn't talk to anyone until you finish your essay. It was an incredible place, very structured. But there was also a lot of dogma in it, because there's dogma everywhere. So one of the things that I walked out of rehab with and 12-step programs was the belief that I was sick forever. I had a disease and I was always going to be sick for the rest of my life, and I just had to accept that. I want to talk about that for a minute, because it's not true. It's not true, but it depends on where you are. There is a very benevolent perspective to calling it a disease. And I think it helps to identify what disease actually means. Because on some level, everything is a dis-ease. Depression is dis-ease. Anger is dis-ease. Okay, cancer is a dis-ease. It's all comes down to understanding how a human being actually works. And I'm not going to cover that too much in this video. It would take forever. Essentially, we're electrical vibrational beings. And when we're in wholeness and alignment, basically all the symptoms can disappear on some level. So calling it a disease fosters compassion, right? It gets rid of the perspective of, why can't you just stop drinking, you stupid, worthless piece of shit addict? Just quit. Well, you can't just quit when you've been doing it for so many years. It becomes a really, really bad habit. And so by labeling it a disease, the establishment, the institutions of society look at people like, oh, they're sick, they can't help it. And that's a very good thing. It helps people to heal. The problem, though, is if you carry that for too long, as you heal, you get to a level where it begins to hold you back, because healing comes in levels and layers. The first step to healing a problem is admitting that you have it. Being like, I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic, help me. For a while, that's progress. But as you heal more and more and more, that can hold you back because ultimately all are what we believe ourselves to be. It's like using the word of God to continue to tell yourself that you're fucked up and there's something wrong with you. So if after 2 years sober, 3 years sober, you're walking around, I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic, I'm sick, I'm broken forever, that's where you're going to stay. Now, how do you get out of that? I'm not going to cover that in this video. I'll cover that in other videos. But that's just the essence of what I want people to understand. Now, ultimately, one of my main goals is to remove the stigma from addiction and trauma, because the negative stigma to being an addict and to having trauma just perpetuates the addiction and the trauma. The more important to make is, I believe very much at this point that addiction comes from trauma. It comes from childhood trauma and ancestral trauma. So it can be inherited trauma from your ancestors, which can be wired into your genetics, which could be termed some sort of like, biochemical or whatever genetic disorder, disease. But that can still be healed when you really know how to heal and you're ready to do it. One of the things, now I'm going to get into the drug war just a little bit. I don't know a lot about the drug war, but I was a child of, the DARE programs, and I heard extensively like how bad drugs were. Now, they didn't really clarify what drugs and why. Like when I was growing up, heroin, methamphetamine, and pot were all equal.
Yeah, straight
I
up.
think anyone with 2 cents of a brain knows that that's not true. And we knew that back then, even as kids who didn't even know anything about drugs, just hearing little bits, you were like, I don't think those are the same thing. And they put acid, psilocybin mushrooms, mescaline, all of these incredibly benevolent medicines in the same category as all the other drugs, just to get out of everybody, created this sort of stigma around all of it, and then made you, and what that ultimately did was left you feeling like a confused piece of shit forever, wanting to use anything for any purpose whatsoever, unless it was a prescribed medication by a psychiatrist, often which are way worse than some of the hardcore drugs sometimes. So my point in conveying this information right now is just be open to like how programming has been on every level. The important thing is to look for the shame. Where do you feel shamed and confused and guilty? Because the shame, the confusion, and the guilt is really what perpetuates the trauma that leads to seeking, outside of yourself to fill the void. But I also want to make this point. Drug addicts are basically just trying to self-medicate. And the more you understand about how certain medicines, certain plants change your biochemistry to open you up to something greater than yourself, the more you realize your initial intention was very right on. You just weren't quite sure where to look or how. And unfortunately, a lot of that stigma from the drug war and the demonization of plant medicine is still prevalent in the 12-step programs. And it's to nobody's fault. It's just because the whole society has been so confused, programmed, and manipulated. Nobody knows what's going on. And when you have an addiction that can kill you, you want to be very careful. And that makes perfect sense, because if you make the wrong step with the wrong belief, as a junkie like I was, you die. But you still, like, if you have things in your gut just going like, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't feel right, something's not right about this, I would highly advise that you listen to that. I wouldn't just jump and, make impulsive steps in any particular direction in terms of using medicines or whatever, but I would listen to that because there's probably a lot to it. You're not sick and broken forever. Your intention was right on the money, just a little bit off the mark. So if you're considering plant medicine, I did this. I used plant medicine for a long time. and I was in the 12-step program at the time, and I felt immensely guilty
Yes, sir.
and scared
That's what they
because
want.
I didn't
They want you to
feel like I
guilty.
could talk to anybody about it because I felt like they were going to judge me, and I felt like they were going
And
to
they
tell
will.
me that it was my addiction and I was
Family will disown
lying to
you.
myself and ready to get loaded and I was out and I was all this stuff, all the programming, all the judgments that a lot of people have, which kind of is
Your family will fucking call
see,
you
the
a
thing
fucking
is,
junkie or fucking pot.
anytime you have a bunch of people together
And disown
thinking,
you.
whatever
Your
the
brother-in-law trying to beat up
ideology
on
is,
you.
the structure of the institution, the organization ends
Fucking
up
call the
getting
cops
just
on you on a
imbued with
daily.
dog crap, just because like the human mind and people's trauma just kind of falls all over. It doesn't matter what it is, and they're doing the best that they can. But I inherited and felt a lot of that in the programs. I'm not judging the program fundamentally.
I am.
But if you're considering doing this,
that's why it's not the 12
listen
steps
to it.
work. It's the circle.
What I did was I heard
And it
about
just never
plant
ends.
medicine and I felt called to it, but I waited. I waited because one, I felt guilty, I felt ashamed, I felt confused, but I also wanted to be careful. I was like, well, is this right for me? I don't want to just leap and do it like an addict, which is impulsive. I want to fix how I feel right now. So I waited and I asked for guidance and I asked for clarity, and it kept coming to me over the course of the year to do it. It kept coming back again and again and again. And so finally I was like, okay, like I want to expand my consciousness. I want to have a bigger connection with a higher power. That's why I'm doing this. I was very clear that my intention was to heal, not to escape. And again, certain drugs help you to heal. And there's extensive research. I think they're getting close to legalizing MDMA, psilocybin, all these different substances, because when you use them properly with the right intention and with support, they can help heal trauma on such a scale. It's unbelievable. Like when people are walking around microdosing psilocybin and MDMA and doing trauma healing work, the whole fucking planet's going to change. Like no shit. It works, and they have extensive studies documenting this. Now, I didn't know this at the time. I just felt an intuitive call, and you can do some research, on your own to figure that out. But I set the intention. It kept coming back to me. I talked to some people that I trusted, so I didn't just make the decision from my own head. And I went and I did, like 12 ceremonies over the course of a year and a half, and I don't regret it even for a fucking second, not even a little bit. It was an unbelievably powerful and benevolent experience. And it helped me heal. It helped me open my mind. It helped me heal my trauma. It helped me transcend a lot of the addiction. And then I worked with psilocybin mushrooms with the healing intention. And then at some point I got to where I didn't really feel like I needed it much anymore. And I went a number of years where I didn't do any of it. And now it's kind of every now and then, whatever, when I feel called. So what happened, though, is all the programming around drugs confused everybody and made them feel guilty and ashamed, one, for doing drugs of any kind, for being a drug addict of any kind, for even having the impulse to heal. And then it creates a doubt. And then you just don't know what to do with that energy. Yeah. Everything is energetic. Everything is vibrational. So like with a drug, from my understanding, like even take the coca plant, which is what's used to make cocaine. It's more the energy behind it. So if that was used in a sacred way, with a healing intention, and developed in a particular way, there's beneficial properties to it.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's not. The energy comes from a place of distortion. It comes from a place of greed. You're tapping into the morphogenetic field of cocaine when you're doing cocaine, right? You're doing it in excess. You're doing it in addiction. You're doing it with the programming. It's all linked to wars, drug cartels, wars on the drugs. You're tapping into a field of hell and trauma and horror when you're doing it, and you're not doing it from a sacred intention, and you're not doing it in the right way. And I don't even know what the healing properties of the coca plant are. I'm not talking about really doing that. I'm just using that as an example, because even that, I feel like if it was done in a sacred way, there has to be a positive benefit for that. I haven't done research on that particular plant, but I just know this is ultimately true, because it's true with everything.
we demonize the whole thing of something. And that relates back to us demonizing the whole thing of ourself in all parts of ourself. Now, why does this matter? It matters because you're not wrong. You didn't fuck up. I mean, you had the right idea. You were trying to heal your body. You were trying to heal your mind. And you just had a lot of bad information, a lot of programming, and you didn't know the best way to go about it. So the point is not to beat yourself up for your past, not to feel ashamed, not to feel guilty, not to feel like a diseased, fucked up, addict.
Broken.
But deep down, probably a really good person with a lot more awareness and intuition. It just wasn't guided correctly because society was set up to misguide you and to guide you into trauma, to guide you into fear, to guide you into sickness. There's so many people locked in prison simply because they were in trauma and trying to heal and didn't have the support system to do it, which doesn't mean you don't take responsibility for your actions. I lied, I stole, I cheated, all of that. That was my decision. I own that.
Teenagers.
But also, a lot of it's not your fault too, where it stems from. And the more you forgive yourself and have love and compassion for yourself and understand that like your intention was the right intention, you just needed a little better guidance. The more you don't shit on your whole past and validate your whole experience, beat yourself up and continue to propagate the exact same thing that led to your addiction to begin with. So drugs are different. Different drugs have different properties. They have different intentions. They come from different places. It's about discernment. It's about wisdom. And it's about reaching out and looking for the proper guidance. Let me know how this goes. Let me know if you have any questions, revelations, or breakthroughs. It's a topic I'm very passionate about. I'll do a lot more on this in the future. I have a free energy clearing. The description below can help you clear some.
I like it a lot. That's good. Because
this
fucking Sean too. Sean got caught with fucking the pot, and then they forced his mom to rehab as a teenager, saying that they're gonna take her kid away. And in rehab, he met 12, 13-year-olds that were putting trifentanil up their butt. How does a 13-year-old get trifentanil? I don't know.
There's one simple vision hack anyone can use to improve vision, so you can say goodbye to your optometrist for good. Canada's fixed mortgage rate even further downward in January, as lower bond yields, at least up until recently, have put downward pressure on Canadians' cost of borrowing.
Get them to sign on the line. She's got it.
Indeed, following the Bank of Canada's decision on Wednesday to hold on interest rates, announcing that it was now waiting to see how long rates needed to remain elevated, the media and the usual suspects took that to mean that rate cuts are coming to a theater near us soon, with some even arguing that it could be time to jump into the real estate market.
And I am not lying today.
Yet, as we'll see, while fixed mortgage rates are indeed down, the bond market isn't showing any signs that interest rate cuts are coming anytime soon, with yields up 10 basis points since the Bank of Canada made its decision, and up 30 basis points since the beginning of the month. And the reason, of course, is the stark reminder that we received this week that Canada's fixed mortgage rates are not tied to the Bank of Canada. Rather, they're controlled, to a massive extent, by the United States.
So what I want to do today is go over my best fixed mortgage rates for the month of January, take a look at why bond yields and potentially mortgage rates are rising despite all of the talk of rate cuts, and then discuss what to look for next. Speaking of next, a lack of liquidity is starting to become more and more important to the 2024 narrative, with even the Canadian media starting to pick up on it 3 weeks later, but picking up on it nonetheless. We will continue to track the liquidity in the system and how that affects mortgage rates and bond yields on this channel throughout the year. Click like and subscribe if you want to get those updates, but for now, let's get into these mortgage rates. Onto the mortgage rates. First up, my best 5-year fixed insured mortgage rate. An insured mortgage rate, if you'll remember, that's where you have less than 20% down, you have a 25-year amortization, you qualify at the greater of the contract rate plus 2% or 5.25, and you pay the mortgage insurance. My best 5-year fixed insured mortgage rate in November was 5.59, which dropped down significantly to 5.24 in December, now sitting at 5.09, with variable sitting at prime minus 1.05 or 6.15%. So that's a 15 basis point drop since December, a 50 basis point drop since November, and the 5-year fixed insured rate is now close to back where it was in June of 2023 when it was sitting at 4.99. Also, back then, when Rural LePage predicted that despite the rate hikes, the average price in a home in Canada would end off at $821,300. As a side note, December's average price ended off at $657K, down almost $50K from the $708,000 that it was when Rural LePage made that prediction.
Brilliant guy.
Next, insurable mortgage rates, which are down significantly as well. An insurable mortgage, if you'll remember, that's where you have that 20% down. You qualify with a 25-year amortization and the greater of the contract rate or 5.25%, and you don't pay the mortgage insurance. My best 5-year fixed insurable rate in November was 5.84, which fell to 5.64 in December, and is now sitting at 5.34, with variable sitting at prime minus 0.7 or 6.5%. So that's a 30 basis point drop since December, a 50 basis point drop since November, and again, the 5-year fixed insurable rate is back down to where it was in June of 2023, when it was sitting at 5.34, back when Rural LePage CEO Phil Soper said that we're almost at the point where Canadians who bought at the peak of the market when the average price was $816K would be able to sell without taking a loss.
Boy, that's just a straight shooter with upper management written all over him. Ooh.
And finally, my best 5-year fixed uninsurable mortgage rates, which have plunged downward as well. An uninsurable mortgage rate, that's where you have that 20% down. You have a 30-year amortization, or you take money out of your home vis-a-vis a refinance or equity takeout. You qualify at the contract rate plus 2% or 5.25, whichever is higher. And of course, you don't pay the mortgage insurance. My best 5-year fixed uninsurable in November was sitting at 6.34. That fell to 6.14 in December, and then dropped significantly this month down to 5.62, with variable sitting at prime minus 0.15 or 7.05%. So that's a big drop in the uninsurable mortgage rate, down 60 basis points since November. 5-year fixed mortgage rates have dropped considerably over the past few months and are now very close to where they were back in June of 2023, when bond yields were very close to where they are right now. As we all remember, after June of 2023, bond yields shot up almost 100 basis points as central banks raised rates, and more importantly, a deluge of U.S. debt came to the market. Let's recall very briefly that bond prices and yields are inversely related. So when a bond price drops, its yield rises. With the U.S. issuing so much debt after June of 2023, so many treasury bonds hitting the market, a lot of that debt was hitting that market with few takers. An overabundance of supply without corresponding demand, prices go down and yields go up. Economics 101.
The f*** is that?
Bond yields did eventually fall between October and November as the U.S. announced it was going to be changing the way it borrowed money, borrowing more short-term money, relieving pressure on the long-term debt markets. But, as we were reminded this week, this was a band-aid solution, as the U.S. held a 5-year auction on the same day that the Bank of Canada made its announcement, and that auction is being called a dud. The United States ultimately had to pay a higher yield on the debt it was issuing on Wednesday than it thought it was going to have to, as investors are growing increasingly more wary about the amount of U.S. debt coming to the market. As such, on Wednesday, U.S. yields popped up following the auction. Canada's yields followed suit on the same day that the media took the Bank of Canada's announcement to indicate that the cost of borrowing is coming down soon. with, I should note, zero mentions from the media about how the bond market was diverging from the Bank of Canada's announcement. Well, the Canadian media didn't mention it, that is. On US Bloomberg, it was noted that the bond market is bracing for record auction sizes coming to the market in the coming months, meaning that over the next 3 months, the US is going to be holding its largest auctions that investors have ever seen. William O'Donnell from Citigroup said that there is absolutely no precedent for the pace and magnitude of these supply increases. Bloomberg, again, Bloomberg US, noted that February to April could see the biggest ever 10-year auctions. And as we discussed earlier and saw when fixed mortgage rates popped up following June, when there is an overabundance of supply, an overabundance of US debt hitting the market without corresponding demand, prices fall, yields go up, and mortgage rates follow suit thereafter. Further, as we discussed on this channel before, a lot of the current demand for US debt is coming from the Federal Reserve's reverse repo facility. And if we take a look at that facility is draining down very quickly, down $1 trillion since June, and down almost $300 billion in just the last 2 months alone. If this facility continues to drain, if it drains down to zero, there will be one less buyer of US debt at these auctions, at a time when these auction sizes are set to continually increase, meaning prices go down, yields and mortgage rates go up. Now, voices are emerging in the United States and elsewhere that the Federal Reserve should stop quantitative tightening and start buying up bonds again.
It's the best thing for both of us.
If, and more importantly when, that happens and the Federal Reserve has to stop quantitative tightening and begin buying up bonds again in order to finance a U.S. deficit that is, in fact, inflationary. And all of this stuff matters a great deal for Canadians. When the Bank of Canada made that announcement on Wednesday that it was shifting its thinking from whether or not rates were high enough to now discussing how long they had to stay there, we should have seen yields drop, but we didn't. We saw yields pop up based on U.S. debt problems. And we saw this throughout 2023, where U.S. debt auctions had an even greater impact on our own bond market, on our own mortgage rates, than a simple rate decision coming from the Bank of Canada. Yet, based on what we saw from the media in article after article after article, the only question is when rates are coming down. Given that the U.S. is set to increase its auction sizes to unprecedented levels over the next few months, and we've seen what those auctions can do to the Canadian bond market, it's not clear that the cost of borrowing for Canadians is coming down as quickly or as inevitably as the media seems to think it is. As we saw on Wednesday and throughout 2023, the future of Canadian mortgage rates, at least fixed rates, depend a lot more on much larger forces, on a great big problem to the south. With that said, all things being equal, I think we will start to see the central banks, the Bank of Canada, the Federal Reserve, and quantitative tightening sooner than many are thinking. We will obviously continue to track the U.S. debt and U.S. bond auctions and their effects on us here in Canada. Click like and subscribe for any of those updates, but for now, thanks so much for watching.
Interesting. Because it's absolutely not the issue here.
Shalom, friend. Today I wanted to give you a wonderful gift.
That's definitely not the problem in Canada. We do not in Quebec. Fucking drive around for like 5 minutes, you see like building after building is fucking empty. It's been empty like for years. Next door to me, empty for years. Who owns it? Nobody. The government. Oh, what?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Thanks for tuning in and watching. Today, I'm going to dump on the government and the member of parliament and the ones that are landlords and, to see where they're at. I've compiled my own data, but I'm going to start using this data from last year. These people at the Maple here, they compiled all the landlords or all the government MP disclosures to find out who is a landlord and kind of what those numbers look like. So here's their site. The link is in the description. They just find out if your MP is a landlord. No, I think this is an important piece of information because these are the people that govern us and put together the rules for lending and housing and whatnot and housing policy. So it's very important to see where their kind of allegiances lie and if they're acting in our best interest. But of course, they're made to do these disclosures for a reason. So that we know this information as the public. So let's look at who's who and who's a landlord and who's not. So here's our list of all the landlords. I'm just going to put all three of these up on the screen. They wouldn't fit in all in one big long list. But here they are, and there's a lot of debate. I put this on Twitter, and people say, "Oh, there's more conservatives, and there's more liberals, there's more red, there's more blue." But I don't think it really matters. It's pretty evenly split. But let's look at the numbers here. First of all, here they are with the ridings and by province. Kind of the breakdown doesn't really tell you much, but here's the numbers here. So by political party, we have, of course, the Greens. I think it's just Elizabeth May and her son or something. They're like the co-leaders of the party. They're both landlords, declared landlords in their disclosure. The Conservative Party have 53 MPs that are landlords, or 46% of the conservative MPs are landlords. The Liberal Party have more by numbers, but less by percent. 61 of the MPs are landlords or involved in real estate, and 39% of their total caucus. The Bloc Québécois, only 19%. 6 of those MPs are landlords. The NDP, 4, which actually changed after this. Their leader got added on after this. But anyway, when this was done in middle of 2023, I believe, in June. 4 of the MPs were landlords from the NDP, and 2 of the 3 independents were landlords.
I have come home and I have stood at the base of the steps, just dreading the fourth.
So of course, I wanted to do my own research, a bit more in depth into it, and kind of pick it apart more. So I went to the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, where these disclosures are made, and I pulled the data by myself and kind of to do my own research and a little bit more in depth into it and kind of pick it apart more. So I went to the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Commissioner, where these disclosures are.
Required publicly disclose conflict of interest. It's a conflict of interest for me. My sister works at the same fucking coffee shop at the airport, and we have to disclose that to HR. This is the equivalent of the conflict of interest? Really? Politicians that are fucking landlords? Okay. Members of the House of Commons, including their disclosure summary public statements related to gifts or other benefits, sponsored travel, and material changes. That 60 days after notice of their election published in the Canada Gazette, members must file a conflict of interest and Ethics Commissioner a confidential disclosure statement describing their. What the fuck is the point then? The fuck is the point? Confidential disclosure statement describing their private interests and those of family members. Disclosure summary is prepared and placed in public registry. Each disclosure statement is reviewed at least once a year. Bullshit. That's such bullshit.
Made, and I pulled the data by myself and kind of grabbed the data that I wanted to get. My numbers are very similar to that of the Maples, and of course, involved in real estate, landlords and real estate holdings. Now, the actual landlords were 106 or 102 out of the 336 that had these disclosures. There was a couple of MPs that hadn't done the initial disclosures yet. That's why there's only 336 in the numbers here. But anyway, 128 are either landlords or have real estate holdings by my calculations, and that's 38.1% of all MPs. And the other 208 they don't have disclosures in there identifying that, but they are into all sorts of other stocks and bonds and whatever else. They have to disclose those things. Actually, before I move on talking about the stocks and the bonds and the assets that they have disclosed, I just took a few notes here for some common themes that came up. I don't know what it means, but I saw a lot of Disney shares in these MPs disclosures. I kept seeing, Disney shares coming up. I saw a lot of trust fund babies in there. There was, probably 20 to 30 of the MPs are trust fund babies. So very privileged people, some of them. And Vanguard, a lot of Vanguard shares in there too. Saw that quite a few times in different disclosures. So I thought that was pretty interesting. data just when I was looking through it. There's a lot of information in there that's interesting. So if you have time, go check them out. Go to your local MP or go to the site and check out your local MP and see what they're involved with. Now, one piece of data that I pulled that the Mako didn't was the number of MPs with 2 or more mortgages. And you can see here, 32% of MPs have 2 or more mortgages. I did see one MP that had 5 and his spouse had 1. So they had 6 mortgages total in their family. One note on this, this doesn't mean these people are landlords. So a lot of these actually are not landlords. They don't declare rent income or tenancies. They're actually just a second property, a vacation property, or a cottage or something like that. But the number of MPs with multiple properties, whether they're landlords or not, about 50% in my estimation. So just when they're making policies and trying to, I'm not saying they influence mortgage rates, but they are making policies and stress tests and things like that. Just taking into consideration these people are property owners and multiple property owners, more than 50% by my estimations. So this video is sponsored by the World Economic Forum. Just kidding. This video is sponsored by you, the viewers and subscribers, and the people who like these videos. Thank you for tuning in and watching. For you, I wouldn't be making these videos. So yeah, it's sponsored by you, and they will remain sponsored by you. Now, I felt it only fair to go to the party leaders, the 5 party leaders, and 1 extra actually, to see how they fare. I didn't want to pick on individual MPs, but let's go across all the party lines for their leaders to see if they're landlords and what their status is. So starting with our fearless, whatever leader, Justin Trudeau. So you can see in his latest disclosure, he has accounts receivable from some numbered corporation or Canadian corporation. He's a trust fund baby, blind trust administrators at arm's length. And then when we move down to his investment in private corporations, significant interest in this Quebec corporation, a company based in Montreal, Quebec, which produces and sells firewood and lumber and real estate development. Of course, Justin Trudeau is not going to own individual rental properties. He's involved in big trusts and obviously real estate development of some kind. So yeah, he's very invested in the real estate market. So hopefully it doesn't sway his decisions when he's making policies or voting on policies. Next is the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservatives. He is a sole owner of a rental property located in Park Drive in Ottawa, Ontario. And his spouse is a sole owner of a rental property located on Lake Ridge Drive in Ottawa, Ontario. And of course, other sources of income, rental income from the spouse, rental income, they do have.
Pretty and smart ink.
Have a mortgage with Scotiabank and a mortgage with Tangerine on the spouse's account. Jagmeet Singh, the socialist leader. Now, I believe he is a newer landlord, but his wife is a sole owner of a rental property located in Burnaby, British Columbia. Of course, other income from the spouse is going to be rental income. And they have mortgage with RBC, and he guaranteed the spouse's mortgage with RBC. So he is involved in that rental. It's not just in the spouse's name. He mortgage. Did he use his MP salary to guarantee the mortgage? I don't know. I'm guessing he did. But anyway, something we'll talk about in a second. Elizabeth May's disclosure from her spouse, sole owner of a residence that is partially rented and located in Vancouver, British Columbia, and rental income as the spouse's other sources of income. She was also the guarantor of the spouse's mortgage with Coast Capital Savings and Credit Union. So again, somebody using most likely their MP salary, I'm guessing, not verifying this, but mortgage with Coast Capital Savings, mortgage with Interior Savings Credit Union, and the line of credit in there. Now on to the leader of the Bloc Quebec Law. He has no rental disclosures in here. and no multiple mortgage disclosures either. So it looks like not involved in real estate, not eating up that real estate supply there in Quebec. Yves Blanchette, or whatever his name is. Now, lastly, I wanted to pick on this last politician because she is the Deputy Prime Minister, co-leader of the Liberal Party and governing second most powerful person in Canada politically. So, of course, let's see her disclosures. And I found this very interesting. Joint ownership with another person of residential property located in whatever street in Kiev, Ukraine. So, interesting. Joint ownership with spouse of two rental properties located on Aquinas Street in London, UK. Joint ownership with two persons on a farmhouse and a parcel of farmland in Peace River, Alberta. And the spouse declares sole ownership of a rental property located on Irving Place in New York, USA. Other sources of income for her, rental income. Other sources of income for her spouse, rental income. Liabilities, 3 mortgages with Nationwide Building Society joint with spouse. Mortgage with HSBC. Spouse's liabilities, mortgage with HSBC. Activities, member of the Board of Trustees of the World Economic Forum, Davos, Switzerland. So it looks like this MP has quite the portfolio of international properties here, disclosures about being on the Board of Trustees of the World Economic Forum. She was the only one out of all the MPs that had a disclosure from the WEF, by the way.
Yeah,
no other MP, even though they're recognized by them, but no other MP in Canada is part of the board or involved like she is. She's a higher level of involvement in the WEF. So the reason I went through all of these leaders, I didn't pick on any of the other guys, but is there a conflict of interest or is there a moral issue here? Depending on when you bought the properties. If you've owned these properties for decades, maybe not. But if you purchased these properties during a housing crisis using your salary paid to you by the Canadian people, then there's an issue, such as the last housing minister, not the new one. The new one doesn't own any rentals. It has no disclosures of rentals. But the last housing minister didn't really do anything for the housing market in Canada, but was buying rental properties, therefore taking away supply in a supply issue that we had, taking away supply, and with his MP salary, not doing anything for the housing market. So I would consider that a moral problem. Of course, he's not the Minister of Housing anymore, so it's not just me that thinks this. He didn't do his job, and he's gobbling up real estate. So I think that it could be a moral issue depending on the circumstance. I'm not saying all these people have committed moral crimes, but there is a self-serving interest in everybody, whether they're MP or not. But this is just a sample of a group of people that I have access to. I'd like to do this with real estate agents, but I have to call an interview and take their word for whatever they say because they're not required to do disclosures. I'd like to do this with many people, but the amount of work and the disclosure requirements would be quite the task. Anyway, let me know what you think. Is it okay for these MPs to own multiple rental properties and have multiple mortgages while they're influencing and creating rules for mortgages, housing policy in Canada? Or if they're not a moral issue or an ethical issue. I tend to think there is, but I want to hear what you guys have to say in the comments because I got a lot of feedback on this, and I think that it's a relevant debate to have. So now talking about housing supply and housing crisis issues and supply and demand, and we need to build more houses and all the rest of it. I've touched on this before, and I've used different time frames. This time, I want to show you some data, population and housing completions, but I want to go back to the last housing crisis that we really had in Canada, which was the late 80s, early 90s. So going back, I grabbed the data in the increase in population and the housing completions, and just to let you know where I got the data here from Statista. This was going back to 1990 when the population was 27.5 million. And of course, the housing completion data I got from the Government of Canada, from StatsCan, which came from CMHC, and I went back, I got all the completions. They only had completions up until the end of 2022. 2023 isn't out yet, so this is why I'm going from 1990 to 2022. And here is the data showing that our population in that time frame has increased to just under 12 million people. Our housing completions have been just under 6 million, and our required completions based on that population increase of just under 12 million at 2.5 people per household, which is the number of people per household as reported most recently back in 1990. Someone just posted on X, what was it then? Of course, it would have been higher then. So our surplus is going to be actually higher than I'm reporting here. But we only required 4.784 million homes to house the increased population in Canada, but we built almost 6 million. So we have a surplus of 1.2 million homes, or approximately 1.2 million homes in that time frame. Now, of course, anyone that's going to argue that we have a housing supply issue now, yes. In the last couple of years, they're bringing in 1 million people and they're only building 200,000 homes or completing 200,000 homes. Of course, we have a supply issue. But if you look at the big picture, and again, this is a 32-year time frame, you don't have a supply issue. We have a demand issue because people are turning those homes into Airbnbs and rentals, and vacation properties, whatever the case may be. Now, this data also doesn't include any basement apartments or rental apartments or duplex things that have not been registered, but definitely not basement apartments. They're not considered housing starts, and all these other in-law setups that we have, which could probably add another 500,000 to 1 million units to the supply over the last 32 years. So again, we have a demand issue, not a supply issue. I keep saying this, and of course you have this sample of the population that happens to be MPs that, almost 50% would own multiple properties. So if everybody's going to own multiple properties, and some of these, there was many that have 3, 4, 5 properties, and I didn't break those down. So if everyone was to buy multiple properties, we're obviously going to have a demand issue. But to house the population, we have more than enough homes to house the population. So next, to kind of back up my theory here, I want to show you the number of listings for sale in the area that I have access to and the number of listings for lease. So starting with the number of listings for sale, and this data on these charts, it only goes back 10 years. For these quick charts that I can pull, or else I would have went back further, but I have to pull that data manually. I only have so much time. But regardless, you can see whether it's on the Toronto Real Estate Board or on the ITSO, the other one here, you can see the number of listings for sale in the ITSO one, the one that doesn't say TREB, has actually decreased from 10 years ago, from last year. It's not at highs. We don't have more listings. We built more houses, but we have less listings. In the Toronto Real Estate Board, it is up from 10 years ago, but it's down from the last 2 years, and it's not up by much. Again, there has been a lot of building and condo development in the GTA in these years, but we really don't have that much more listings. So where has all this inventory gone? We built homes, but we don't have any more listings for sale. People aren't selling them. Is that why? They can't sell their house because they can't afford to buy a new one? I don't think so. This is where they've gone. Looking at the two same areas that I just showed you with these for sale listings, I'll leave them all up on the screen here. You can see the number of lease listings showing up on TREB has increased dramatically. Wow. It's over twofold in the last 10 years. Wow. Every year it's almost increased. 2020, 21, 22 was flat, but 2023 is up, meaning there has been a lot more leases coming on the market. And if you look at the other chart here, this is from ITSO, the 20 board surrounding the GTA, we have gone up 4 times since 2014, and just since 2021, our number of listings for lease has doubled. So where has our inventory gone? Well, it's turned from listings for sale into listings for lease. Clearly here, one of the most populated areas, or these combined, are the most populated areas in Canada. And again, we have no new listings for sale over the last decade, but we have double and quadruple, depending on the area, listings for lease. So all of our listings clearly have been bought up and turned into rentals by investors. Some of them are speculators that couldn't assign the property or sell it, so they have no other choice but to rent it out. But it's very clear that our inventory, and I say this all the time, our inventory was bought up by speculators and investors, and they had the opportunity to do it because of the wealth effect with money printing and asset price inflation. Their asset prices inflated. They took the money out and bought more assets with it. And this is what happens when the government policies and the Bank of Canada policies aren't working for Canadians, or the world in this case. So you're left with a situation like this, where whether it's cars, houses, food, everything's inflated, and the wealth effect only applies to those that had existing assets, and the people that were buying up, or still are buying up these investments, are the people that were already invested in the market. So brings me back to my MP rant, where I'm calling these people out. I believe it is a moral responsibility that the MPs, act in Canadians' best interests, and of course that's their job. But when they are involved so heavily in real estate, will that sway their perception or sway their policy making? Because do they really want their properties to go down, especially if they bought them in the last few years and they could be underwater? They're going to vote for what kind of serves them best at the same time. Just as you have certain leaders that team up with other leaders so they can stay in power, are they doing what's best for Canadians, or are they staying in power till they get their pension plan? It's the facts are there. Whether they're doing it for one reason or another, the option is still on the table, and it just doesn't look good. Anyway, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
I'm not doing very good.
With the BMOE business plan,
Shut the fuck up. Oh my god, I hate you people.
Known for a number of different things. Poutine, saying the word A, general politeness, pronouncing the word boot, totally normally. And more recently, some less endearing things have been added to that list. Debt and unaffordable housing. You see, in places like Vancouver, British Columbia, it's not uncommon to see homes like this 3-bedroom 1949 bungalow going for $5.5 million. Albeit that's in Canadian. It's only 4.1 million in American dollars. But as property prices have risen in the country, incomes have not kept pace, leading Canadian households to become some of the most indebted in the world, as homebuyers have made up the difference between their incomes and house prices using debt. Now, interest rates are on the rise, home prices are down 12% from their peak, and people are starting to wonder if Canada's housing is in a soon-to-pop bubble. So, as your resident Canadian finance YouTuber, I wanted to make this video to help answer the question, how bad is it really? And to be clear, it's impossible to predict where things will go from here and to try and time a crash. And I'll try to explain the important variables that will influence the outcome one way or another without making a grand statement about how now is the time to short Canadian housing. But many Canadian households are currently experiencing significant financial strain. And while there are some unique advantages Canada has when compared to the US in the real estate space, there are also some pretty depressing, unique features to Canadian real estate that makes the area harder to manage than an asbestos-laden popcorn ceiling. So let's talk about real estate in Canada. Buckle up. It's going to be a ride on today's Plain Bagel. During the 2008 financial crisis, the U.S. housing market was pummeled. Rising interest rates combined with unsustainable lending practices caused mortgage delinquencies to surge and home prices to lose a fifth of their value, contributing to one of the worst economic ruts in U.S. history. Just north of the border, however, things were a lot less dramatic. Despite Canada's heavy economic ties to the U.S., home prices in the country fell just 9.2% from their peak in 2008 to their trough in 2009. And while it took nearly a decade for U.S. properties to return to their previous high, Canadian properties recovered all of their lost ground within 2 years. Many attributed this resilience to Canada's sound mortgage lending practices and robust banking industry, whereas America's fragmented and loosely regulated finance sector had allowed the proliferation of risky loans, speculation, and leverage upon leverage in the real estate space. Canada's mortgage lending activity was much more conservative, with the market being dominated by large, well-capitalized, and diversified players were carefully watched in their investment banking and mortgage lending activities by regulators. The tenacity of Canadian housing has, however, proven to be a double-edged sword. Because while America's real estate slump did have the silver lining of making properties more affordable for a period of time, Canadian properties never experienced a similar correction. Even after accounting for the recent slump from their pandemic high in 2022, Canadian home prices have doubled in the last decade, compared to hourly wages, which have increased a meager 24% roughly over that same time period. Now, it's estimated that homeowners require a minimum income of $180,000 to afford the average property price of $750,000.
I don't even know if we
The
paid
median
$108,000.
family income sits at roughly $121,000 or 33% this amount. But that's at the aggregate level. Things are craziest when you dive into Toronto, Ontario, and Vancouver, British Columbia, two of the top three most populous cities in Canada, with roughly a quarter of the population between them. Average prices in these two cities have reached $1.1 and $1.2 million, Toronto and Vancouver respectively. That's roughly 9 times the average economic family's total income for both cities, or double that in some markets if you were hoping for a detached home, making the traditional concept of home ownership for young Canadians a bit of a pipe dream in some areas.
Going from survival mode my whole life to having enough money to like.
I just hate women cry.
Outside Canada, this might all sound a little shocking to you, because if you look at a map of our beautiful country, you notice that the one thing we aren't missing is literal space. Canada is the second largest country in the world and ranks just 38th in terms of population size. How could a country with so much of this key ingredient struggle to house its population? Well, while there are many rural townships across the country where you'll find more affordable housing, Canada's population is heavily concentrated around its cities, with roughly 3/4 of the population living in large urban centers. And the density in these areas is only going up. Between 2016 and 2021, Canada had double the population growth of every other G7 country at 5.2%, thanks primarily to immigration, the vast majority of which was to the country's larger cities. And in fact, Canada saw its population surge 2.7% last year alone, welcoming over 1 million people for the first time in its history. But while population growth obviously plays an important role when it comes to real estate, immigration has played an important role in supporting the economy and Canada's aging population. Not to mention, there are many cities in the US with a higher population density than Toronto that don't struggle with sky-high property prices. So, what's causing Canada's market to stand out in terms of affordability? Well, simply put, one of the key differentiators here is a lack of supply. Canada has the lowest housing supply per capita out of the G7 nations at 424 units per 1,000 people, with the Federal Housing Agency estimating that Canada would need 5.8 million new homes to restore affordability by 2030. 2.5 times what the country is on track to complete. And while building more homes seems like a simple solution here, there are some meaningful roadblocks to that objective. For one, there's a lack of skilled labor in the space, with Canada experiencing a record high of 80,000 vacancies in construction. Part of the reason immigration is actually viewed by many as being part of the solution, not the problem. Bureaucracy and red tape have also made building real estate in Canada a particularly cumbersome affair. One expert estimates it takes 8 to 10 years to go from acquiring an undeveloped piece of land to building a property in Toronto. And zoning restrictions imposed by municipalities across the country have made the densification of land incredibly difficult. In Toronto, for example, the majority of land only allows for single-family developments, with mid to high-rise buildings only typically being permitted in limited locations, despite it being the most populated city in the country of Canada. This is actually why that house from the beginning was listed for so much. It had the zoning for a larger property, demonstrating just how rare that is for some of these cities. Now, Canada's government has tried a few things to solve housing affordability, such as a recently announced tax-sheltered savings account for first-time homebuyers, a ban on foreign buyers, and a vacancy tax introduced at the federal, provincial, and municipal level in some cases. More attention has also been brought to the zoning.
Oh, I can't do it. This is literally a script of politician speeches. Like, you're just literally rehashing all the information that all the politicians have to show.
T'as l'air d'une fille qui est allée chez Uniqlo.
Oh, of course. The drug company. What's in next? Oh, Kia. Is it the war? No, Nitro, not the war. Oh, insensitive, I find.
Hello again, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. So this week, I want to go through all the mixed messaging we get on the Canadian housing market. We hear, houses where prices are going up, prices are going down, supply, demand, everything else, right? So I kind of wanted to go through the latest news and opinions to kind of get a all-round perspective, because it's day by day, right? One day you hear one thing, and the next day you hear another. And of course, interest rates, and, inflation rates, and all the rest of this stuff. So I kind of just want to go through a few things and kind of get a consensus to where we are. So let me start off with the latest news in the last week or so. So from the banks. So the big banks here, bank CEOs expect to put more money aside for bad loans and higher rates. So of course, the banks, or some of the banks, I think of Scotiabank and the Royal Bank, they're increasing their loan loss provisions so that when people default on their loans, they have more money to cover those. So they're putting more of that money away, and it's obviously a sign of the times. Next, we had an article that just came, and it was from Post, or the Financial Post here, and of course they're interviewing Roy LePage again. Why Canada's housing market could rebound sooner than many expect. Buyers will come back before the Bank of Canada cuts rates, says Roy LePage. So of course this is not unexpected that a real estate company is saying that prices are going to accelerate and sales are going to increase. The recovery will begin when consumers have confidence the home they buy today tomorrow. We see that tipping point occurring in the before the highly anticipated easing of the Bank of Canada's key lending rate. So those comments were from the CEO of Roy LePage, Phil Soper, and of course he's been very bullish on the real estate market, and I'm probably the most bearish realtor in Canada. Actually, let me know, who do you think is the most bearish realtor in Canada? I don't know if it is me, but I'm got to be up there, and I have my good reasons for it. Next, I want to move on to RE/MAX forecast, and this is the forecast for the 2024 year. The price outlook, there have just a modest increase of 0.5%, increased activity, so more sales, obviously, and varied conditions. So not very bullish, but mildly increasing sales and prices. And the latest statement from Sean Cathcart, Korea's senior economist, was the December bounce in home sales the start of the expected recovery in Canadian housing markets? Probably not just yet, said Sean Cathcart, Korea's senior economist. It was more likely just some of the sellers and buyers that were holding on to unrealistic pricing expectations last fall finally coming together to get deals done before the end of the year. We're still forecasting a recovery in housing demand in 2024, but we'll have to wait a few more months to get a sense of what that ultimately looks like. So don't get confused with housing recovery. He's talking about a demand recovery. He's not specifically talking about prices. But of course, we have been at an all-time low for sales, or at least since 2008. So of course, we can only go so low. I keep saying this, and lower, but realistically, we're probably at the bottom of the actual sales, number of sales. I expect sales to increase, because they can't get much lower, especially with 1.2 million people or whatever came into Canada last year. but that doesn't necessarily translate into increased prices. Here's a good article from the CBC, where Ontario's housing market is headed in 2024. Forecasts predict sluggish sales unless mortgage rates drop sharply or sellers start cutting prices. Now, they interviewed 3 industry professionals or experts. You probably heard their names, but let's see what they have to say, just a few quotes from each of them. There's a general consensus among those experts that sales volume will remain sluggish in the first part of 2024 until or unless mortgage rates come down significantly or sellers start accepting lower bids. The general trend we're probably going to see is one of continued stagnation, said Ron Butler, a broker with Butler Mortgage. Of course, Ron has his own podcast on YouTube, the Angry Mortgage Podcast or something like that. I don't find him that angry, but I'm sure he can be when he wants to. It's the combination of these high prices and high interest rates that is keeping a lot of buyers out of the market right now, Pasalis said. And that's John Pasalis, a broker in Toronto with Realosophy, I think the name of his company is. Does a lot of interviews and has a big social media presence also. TD economist Rishi Sondhi predicts sales volume to remain relatively low in the coming year, although better than what the numbers were in 2023. We think that the bottom has probably been reached, Sondhi says. Sales levels were just too darn low in Ontario in 2023. It's hard to go lower from there. So I agree. I've said that before myself. It is hard to go lower, and I think 2023 most likely was the bottom for sales. I wouldn't bet my life on it, but it probably looks that way. Now, that article was focusing on Ontario, but again, Ontario is the epicenter of the Canadian market right now, so it is relevant to the national picture as a whole. And just released today, I believe it was today, housing starts in Canada are down 7% year over year in 2023. So overall starts are down, and single detached are actually down 25%. They make up 25% of that 7% down. So builders and developers are building less homes because there's less demand out there, especially at the prices they're currently at. And moving on to consumer confidence. Consumer confidence overall is at an all-time low. This chart goes back to 2003, and the percentage who think now is a good time for a major purchase is almost at its lowest point ever. December did pick up the time. It's at an all-time low there, and it doesn't look like it's getting better anytime soon. And then the overall index is also at an all-time low. It did tick up just a bit in December for some reason, but again, not enough for a major housing recovery at this point. Okay, so let's summarize this information. Let's put it in one chart to see where we are. I didn't cherry pick this data. I'm just trying to look for different industries. If you can think of another industry to weigh in on this, let me know. And anyway, let's go through this chart here, or this table. So the banks increasing loan loss provisions to cover bad debts. That's the big news from the banks this year. Not looking good for the housing market. Not a situation where housing will be, rocketing to the moon and prices will be taking off with news like that. The Bank of Canada doesn't make forecasts on housing. They talk about it a lot in part of their economic statements, but in their statements, in the last one in December, the economy is slowing. Shelter costs are still adding to inflation. So if they have any control over this, they're not going to let shelter costs keep adding to inflation, or part of their mandate is to stop that. And how are they going to do that? With higher interest rates, higher for longer. We'll see this month what happens. The CPI today, 3.4%, and a major part of that is the housing or shelter costs, whether it's rent or the interest portion of the mortgage payments. It is a major concern. So they're not in the mood to see house prices skyrocket. And I'm sure if they did, they're not going to start lowering rates when house prices are skyrocketing. Next, we have the big real estate brokerages, Royal LePage and Remax, which seem to put out their yearly forecasts. If there's other ones, let me know. I haven't really heard of any. But Royal LePage, of course, sales up and prices up. And I think they're about 5.5% with prices. And Remax, sales up and prices slightly up, just 0.5%, as we just saw. The Canadian Real Estate Association forecasting a demand recovery, but they do have a wait and see approach. Not much on the price forecast, although there is a forecast out there that shows prices, I think, increasing. But again, for 2024, they're more focused on demand. They didn't really talk about supply either, which was a thing I noticed. Here's the chart. You can see it shows the number of sales and the pricing, but it doesn't show listings. So there's no talk of supply. It's only demand in their equation. The industry experts we just saw from that CBC article, sluggish sales unless rates drop sharply or prices come down. The builders and developers, housing starts are down, right? So the builders didn't start as many homes last year. They're not going to finish as many this year, in 2024. So there's a big indicator. Builders and developers, they know the demand's not there, especially at these prices, and they can't pencil those in. It's not happening in 2024. And last of all, the consumers we looked at, consumer confidence at an all-time low. So you can see there, just from that table, the overall sentiment is leaning towards bounding or going up anytime soon. We still have a long road to go, and we'll see what happens, but I'm sure the sales will pick up, but people are going to be looking for deals. They're going to be offering lower prices. Everyone that I've talked to, any buyers that I'm working with, they're all in the same boat. There's lots of listings out there, but the sellers need to be more realistic on the prices, and they need to come down, or the buyers need to negotiate more. Before I move on to the national stats, I am researching an agent for someone who reached out to me on Twitter. I need somebody in the Burnaby or Vancouver area, like-minded, like me. This is what people want. Just honest, call it how it is. If the house is priced too high, it's priced too high. Let them know, not just push them into the easiest sale. So if you know a good realtor in that Burnaby, Vancouver area, let me know. Throw it in the comments, and I'll add them to my list when I'm doing my research. I have agents that I know in many cities, but I don't know anyone in that area that I can be comfortable sending someone to.
A lady that I'm supposed to be messaging. They do groups that go and protect heritage buildings, because I heard they were selling a heritage building for $1 on the radio. And this lady has a group of people that go around to make sure that those buildings don't get torn down by developer companies. I'm just pondering.
Okay, on to the national statistics. Canadian home sales see unexpected surge to close out 2023. Statistics released today by the Canadian Real Estate Association, CREA, show national home sales were up noticeably on a month-over-month basis in December 2023. Home sale activity recorded over Canadian systems rose 8.7% between November and December 2023, putting it on par with some of last year's relatively stronger months recorded over the spring and summer. So, of course, big uptick in sales in December. But again, looking at the big picture, last year had one of the slowest or lowest sales numbers in recorded history since 2008. We'll get into that in a second. So it was a big increase month over month. The fall was very subdued, those sales, very low numbers of sales. So that's in context. It's not as good as it seems. But again, can't really get much lower, so I'm sure we will see many upticks in the number of sales in the coming months. On an annual basis, home sales totaled 443,511 units in 2023, a decline of 11.1% from 2022. Actually, I'd like to add in there, it's also a decline of 32% from 2021. Now, 2021 was the biggest year for sales in history. So again, 32% down from 2021, but 11% down as reported here from 2022. It was technically the lowest annual level for national sales activity since 2008, although it was very close to the levels recorded in each of the 5 years following the 2008 financial crisis. And again, to put that into perspective, our population was millions less back in those years. While December did offer up a bit of a surprise in sales numbers to cap the year, the real estate test of the market's resilience will be in the spring. said Larry Surquat, chair of Korea. There are only a couple of months left and it gets underway. And I agree, this spring will be the test. If the spring, gets off like a normal spring and prices increase a little bit, we're just headed in the same direction. If the spring stays flat though, that's when we're going to see late year buying opportunities that I've previously forecasted. That's when things are going to change and prices will most likely decline later in the year and into 2025. So this spring really is going to happen in the market. He's right now. I don't see the opposite happening. I don't see it taking off and sales jumping up to record levels. So a quick look at some charts of theirs, the sales activity by quarter, last quarter there, Q4 2023, nothing special as they reported. Looking at new listings in that most recent quarter, they look pretty healthy overall. So looking at the market balance here, the months of inventory did drop down a bit. It's below 4 now. And of course, the sales to new listings ratio did creep up because we had less new listings and more sales in December. One last chart I want to show from them is the aggregate composite MLS HPI, the year-over-year percentage change. So how much does it change year over year? I just want to point out that it's been relatively flat. There hasn't been any other really times since they recorded this that it's been flat. It's actually declining. So are we in a reversal? Are prices going to be declining again? It looks to me, yes. But again, it could break out either way. But that is unprecedented. There's no other time where it's been that flat. You could say 2013 was, but it had a clear trend. It was going down and started going back up into 2014. This time, it's actually started going up and now it's going back down. So interesting. I think it's obviously going to start breaking to the downside at some point, but we'll obviously keep an eye on that so along with the prices. And talking about the prices, here are the natural price movement for December. So prices did increase in Canada nationally 1.7% month over month, or $11,000, 4.6% year over year from last December, or $29,000, and we are still down 19.5% from the peak, or $159,000. And you can see there that head and shoulders pattern still looks very pronounced. Not big movement with that recent change in December either way. We will see which way it breaks. You know which way I think it's going to break. Anyway, that's it for this week. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Okay. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like these people just like I do number stuff. Like honestly, so, like I think I just sit at the desk and just like go on Excel sheets and just like I'm a fucking ethics major. Oh my god, I have a master's in economics. Like, is that amounts to? Oh, first, it's 3 weeks. The main reason why everyone's broke, because I want to be broke. Having money.
I was 17 years old.
What do I do? Fucking have money, so it's immediately out of my fucking possession. No thanks.
Update on a case where Ontario teacher candidates had argued that they should not have to pass a mandatory math test in order to get qualified because they said the math test was racial discrimination. Now, I described this case in an earlier video. It was a case that we at the Canadian Constitution Foundation intervened in at the appeal. Well, the decision is now out. The math test is not discriminatory, and I can't wait to tell you all about it. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Christine, and I'm the litigation director for the Canadian Constitution Foundation, a legal charity that fights for fundamental freedoms in Canada. I upload regular videos about our ongoing cases and about other interesting developments in constitutional law in Canada. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please hit like and subscribe below. It really helps my videos out a lot. Also, please remember that nothing in my videos is legal advice. If you have your own legal question or problem, please consult your own lawyer. So I have done a few videos about this case, which is called Petrucci and Ontario, but I call it the math is racist case. Now I'll put a link in the description below to some of those other videos and a link to the case itself so you can read it for yourself. Now, before I get to the decision, I should tell you a little bit about the lead up to the case. So the Ontario government had created this new requirement that teacher candidates needed to pass what they called a math proficiency test. And this was created because the government and parents were pretty concerned about low and dropping math scores among Ontario students. And due to a math teacher shortage, elementary teachers can end up teaching math even if they had never intended to be a math teacher. So the government decided to create this math proficiency test to ensure that all teachers had this baseline level of math skill. And the test included questions that had actually been pulled from existing tests for students in grades 3, 6, and 9, as well as the test also included a series of questions on math pedagogy, which is how to teach math. Now, I think we all probably share a similar view that requiring teachers to answer some basic math questions, the same questions that are given to their own students, along with requiring them to answer a few additional questions about how to teach math, well, that seems probably pretty reasonable to most of us. But a group of teacher candidates challenged the test, arguing that because some early results of the test showed that teacher candidates from certain racial groups were failing the test at higher rates than white candidates, the test was a form of unjustified racial discrimination. So they brought a legal challenge on the basis of the Charter guarantee in Section 15 to be free from unjustified discrimination. And shockingly, a lower court in Ontario accepted the teacher candidate's argument. And the lower court decision, I have to say, it was based on really flimsy data. It was based on preliminary test results from July of 2021. And at that point, there were 3,600 candidates who took the test and around 2,800 who actually filled out this demographic questionnaire. And based on that questionnaire and the test results, the teacher candidates argued that there was this significant disparity in the relative success for test takers in different race categories. So, for example, the 2021 data showed that 70% of Black candidates and 71% of Indigenous candidates passed the test, compared to 92% of Asian candidates and 91% of white candidates. Now, for that July data, it means that there were 474 candidates who failed the first time they took the test.
That makes sense.
And about half of those 474 retook the test. And of those retakes, 85% passed.
My grade 7 math teacher told us on our first day that he was really upset because he wanted to be a gym teacher, but they already had a gym teacher, so they made him a math teacher. So here we are. So he would give us one sheet of paper with like 30 questions, like very like basic like algebra. Not even, I think we started off with like fucking like, I don't know if it was long division, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, and we would pick on the one Tyler. We would tell Tyler to like give us his paper, and we just like pass Tyler's paper. And then the rest of the class, we would listen to Metallica, and he taught us to play fucking Texas Hold'em. Yeah. That was all grade 7. I actually showed up to my last day of grade 7, and he was like, "What are you doing?" We're like, "Should we go to class?" He's like, "It's the last day and last period." Oh, you guys are the only ones here. You know? Oh, that's funny. Oh, my high school was all a fluke. It's funny. Okay. Oh my god, I had the worst teachers.
But among the retakes, very, very few of them gave demographic data. So the lower court was left with this very, very tiny pool of data. 259 candidates who had failed the first test and hadn't yet rewritten the test, because you had unlimited rewrites, and they hadn't rewritten by the end of July. But part of the lower court's reasoning was discriminatory, was they found that just having to retake the test at all was a burden that fell disproportionately on some racial groups. Now, it was this flimsy data that the court to determine that the test was racial discrimination. And I want to emphasize a few things here. First, of course, it is good to have a diverse teaching profession. We want our students to have a variety of teachers, including teachers who reflect different races and cultures, and teachers who look like them. That is a good thing. Second, there is absolutely nothing about a person's race that makes them better or worse at math. And there should also be nothing surprising about the fact that there's variation among the pass and fail rate of a test. I mean, we all have, there's natural human variation. We shouldn't expect total uniformity in test scores. And to the extent that there is a difference in the pass rate, that is an opportunity to improve your skill. It is a test that has unlimited retakes, and it has an opportunity to improve. It creates an opportunity, I guess, to those people who are educated in the politics of radicalism. Variation in math somehow becomes evidence of racism in math. And I actually think that it's the racist position to say that there should be no test of math skill for teachers because some racial groups might be more likely to fail the test. Nothing about your race determines that. And we used to be able to spot this a mile away and say that that kind of argument is bigoted and racist. Some people call it the soft bigotry of low expectations, but I don't even think it's soft bigotry. It's just racist to think that your ethnic background has anything to do with your ability to do math. And there's a very famous quote from a German mathematician named David Hilbert. And Professor Hilbert is credited with saying, "Mathematics knows no race or geographic boundaries. For mathematics, the cultural world is one country." And look, most of us today look at that statement and we say, that's straightforward, pretty sensible. Math is a universal language. It is a pure science. Your race has nothing to do with it. But when Hilbert said it, it actually took a lot of courage because he was a mathematician in 1930s Germany at what until 1934 was the leading math institution in the world, a place called Göttingen University, Germany. And in the Europe, Hilbert had supported the appointment of Jews to academic positions in the university. He co-authored a book with a Jewish scholar, but in 1933, the Nazis implemented a law that ordered the dismissal of Jews from the civil service, including university professors. So Hilbert watched the Jewish professors be purged from institutions like his university. And in 1934, Hilbert went to a banquet where he was asked by the new Nazi Minister of Education, how is mathematics at the university now that it is free from the Jewish influence? And Hilbert replied, there is no mathematics in Göttingen anymore. And his position is as true today as it was in the 1930s. There's nothing about your race that makes someone better or worse at math. And that racist ideology destroyed not just Göttingen University, but all of Germany and much of Europe. And to me, this case is an echo of that racist ideology. You know, I don't want to overstate the point. Progressives today are not destroying mathematics by ordering racial minorities removed from universities, but instead they are perpetuating bigotry by emphasizing the importance of race over knowledge and skill, and through that bigotry of low expectations. And I think that the case, Petrucci, is just another example of that. But the decision of the lower court has now been overturned by the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal wrote that relying on just the first 7 weeks of data was insufficient. The data sets were just too small. And at the appeal, there was more information that was presented. Now, that's not always allowed in appeals, but in this case, they brought later data from later on in 2021 that showed of the now 8,350 candidates who took the test one or more time, 95% passed, including 93% from racialized groups. And